Hello and welcome. I hope that things aren't too hectic and confusing and stressful for you. The world does seem to be in quite a state of turmoil right now, but you don't need me to tell you that. Anyway, I thought what I'd do is to jump on and talk a little bit about leadership. Now, as I've explained, in terms of this channel, I tend to talk about things that are to do with development of self, personal leadership, and how we can avoid some of the pitfalls that are self-inflicted psychologically, and also how we can avoid those people who may attempt to predate against us in different ways. What psychological traps do other people lay for us? I also like to talk about, sprinkle in the mix, philosophy. Why are we here? What's it all about? What is the nature of reality? And so on. And as you'll also probably be aware, I talk about leaders who are in the public eye. Not always about the UK and not always about Labour and not always about Keir Starmer. But when things attract your attention and when you feel that certain words have to be spoken, we have to speak up at certain times, then, well, I probably very much like you, if I feel I have something relevant to say that could be useful to put into the mix, a critique, a support, whatever it may be, then I believe it is the duty of each and every one of us to speak up, particularly when we are still, generally speaking, able to have an opinion and express it, by and large. Thank goodness. So, what I thought I would do is to talk about just poor leadership. Why is it there? And I'm not specifically really addressing politicians here, but yeah, that will come up. I am speaking generally, because this could apply, poor leadership could apply to a situation that you find yourself in right now. Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's to do with a sports team. Maybe it's something to do with the community. But you may find yourself in a situation where you're like just bemused by somebody's so-called leadership, whatever that may be, whether it's pettiness, whether it's indecisiveness, whether it's favoritism, whether it is cliques, or in essence, any number of things may be going on for you. But the point is that when you experience poor leadership or you are feeling the brunt of that psychological assault, which is what it can often be, then you know it. It's sometimes the detail is different, but by and large, that sense of, oh my goodness, what is going on here? You know it when you feel it. You know it when you see it. You know it when you hear it. And yes, so I will talk about politicians, but I just want to emphasize this can be quite general. It is not necessarily about politicians. It is about leadership in different areas. And one of the reasons that having the right leader in place, having leaders who, if they're in positions of power, influence, authority, are ethical, moral, decent human beings, comfortable, I often think it's important to be for leaders in their own skin. In other words, they are balanced, they're grounded. Because if we have people who are none of those things, or perhaps only a couple of those things, then the influence that they can have over us is, or can be, quite immense. And again, just sticking with work for a moment, how many people go into work and dread it? How many people go into work and dread it because of who's in charge, or the group that may be in charge, the decisions that are made, the unfairness, the fear of speaking up, and so on. And therefore, I believe that a psychologically safe environment, it doesn't mean an environment which is perfect. It means an environment where the leaders seem to be grounded enough, seem to be moral and ethical enough, seem to care enough that, hey, this is okay. It may have its tense moments. I may find myself saying something that, well, that didn't go down well with this particular group, but at least I know why, and at least it's explained to me, and things are transparent. There isn't this strange, sense that there are other conversations going on that I'm not party to. All the politics in the long grass, with a small p in this example. So that's one of the reasons, and also the other. Well, there's a few, but I'll stick to one other for the moment, for the sake of brevity. One of the other reasons that I think that good leadership is important is because not only, as I've suggested, the impact it can make, but because I've experienced poor leadership. You may have done as well. And over the years, I've worked and continue to work with some people who are struggling, who are suffering because of the horrendous leadership which they find themselves in the midst of. And when you've seen the fallout of that or experienced it firsthand, you know that this is wrong. There's got to be a better way. And one of my goals, professionally and I guess in life, is to challenge poor leadership, is to challenge what is going on, because I'm genuinely puzzled. I mean, aghast and horrified and sometimes really, really annoyed, but also just this I am puzzled. Why do we put up with it? How can it come about? And of course, in business at least, a lot of it can be because of money. A lot of it can be because people just think, well, we better shut up, we'll take the paycheck, and we've got to abide by the toxicity that is there that comes from the top. And those situations also should be challenged, and we need to chip away at that. But you can at least understand why, well, at times you can understand why we can find ourselves in those situations with leaders which are, to say the least, suboptimal. But what then about politics? Well, this is obviously the lens is a magnifying lens, and almost like when you put a magnifying lens to the sun and it concentrates the rays of the sun, it can be dangerous, it can be painful. And when we have leaders, political leaders, who hold so much power, and when they get it wrong, that power is concentrated very often on the vulnerable, very often on the weak, very often on the defenseless. That to me is just, I think it is just ghastly to witness. And so with politicians, that calling out, that critique is really important, because if we don't do it, we're going to be left with again and again and again and again the same shoddy goods, so to speak. I come back to, where have all the good leaders gone? Why do we find ourselves in this situation? And to reiterate, in business, it is sometimes easier to comprehend. I don't agree with it. But in politics, people who run countries, in so-called democracies, how could that be the case? How do we find ourselves in this position? And what I thought I'd do is to share a couple of slides that I've put together just for this little talk. And in no particular order here at all, and only 2 or 3 slides, I, just as a talking point, I wanted to just pick up on this. Think about anyone that you know who's in a position of influence, and consider how annoying, destabilizing, debilitating, depressing this is. Leaders who avoid accountability. So I've said here, failing to take responsibility for mistakes is a recurring theme in terms of bad leaders, bad leadership. Leaders who dodge, blame, or shift blame to others are seen as ineffective and damaging to team trust. So, if you think about it, again, our business example, our sport example, our community example, a leader who will not take responsibility, who will not say, yeah, that was down to me, who avoids being accountable, is so destructive. And when they, as it says here, they dodge blame or shift it to others, and you see that a lot, then they're seen as ineffective and damaging to team trust, but then spread that out to the population. Think of this individual, this leader, as being a politician. And how often do we find ourselves in situations where there are politicians, people with great sway over our lives, who avoid taking responsibility, who avoid accountability? And to narrow it down, and again, to give a specific example, you can see this with so many politicians, but we can see this being played out right now in the UK. It is all about what the previous government did. It's all about the Tories. It's all about the black hole. And up to a point, that was potentially true to a degree, and up to a point, it was, I suppose, okay to refer to, but it's gone on and on and on and on. And if you think about why many of us feel so frustrated, so despondent, so annoyed, then there are a lot of reasons, but thinking about it countrywide, UK-wide in this particular instance, and thinking about the leadership, here's a classic example. There is a failing when it's not done, when accountability isn't taken, pretty much in any sphere and sector of leadership. And when the leader is heading up the country, when that is the Prime Minister, same would apply in the States and many other countries as well, of course, but specifically here to keep the example as coherent and pithy and tight as I can, then we can look at the Prime Minister and say, when are you going to start, doing playing a different record? It's probably it, because it is a little bit like a stock record. It's this constant, it was them, gov, it wasn't us. Constant mantra. And people have had enough. When will you take responsibility? When will you stop dodging blame or shift it to others? And very often others who aren't able to come back and reply and respond and defend themselves. So there's one reason that I think that people are just jaded by politicians, but also jaded with a lot of corporations, jaded by businesses seeking profit, using something that happened a while ago to say, oh, well, the pack sizes are smaller, but we'll charge you more. And it just, that type of corruption, because I think this is corrupted behaviour. I think a lot of corporations behave in a corrupt way. They may pass muster in terms of audits, but I do think they behave in a corrupt way in terms of what is moral, what is ethical. And I think a lot of politicians behave in a corrupt way. And it is a corruption to avoid taking responsibility or accountability. Is it not? Is that not what we need? Where have the people gone who would say, yeah, mea culpa, it was me. I did that. I take full responsibility. Where have all the decent people gone? I think one of the answers to that question is they've just stayed away because they look at politics and think, why should I bother? Which is where our voices come into play. We must demand more and more and more. Voting by walking away. Voting in some situations by not voting, voting strategically, and again, making our voices heard. Because if we just continue to put up with this, it will not change. It's a crazy situation. Crazy if a company isn't accountable, but in many ways that's easier to do, to make them accountable, than it seems to be in terms of politicians. It goes on and on and on. It's not just Labour, of course. I don't mean to imply that. But we did want change. We did need change. We did expect change. And we're not seeing it. What else have I got? So let's then look at this. Good leadership. So taking responsibility. Good leaders own their mistakes and use them as learning opportunities for the teams, fostering a culture of integrity and growth. So if you think about that, again, from a business example, a community example, a sport example, this gets rid of corruption. It's like this, the sunlight. It's like putting sunlight on a situation, the best disinfectant. So we've said, right, okay, we made a mistake. We own it. We take responsibility for it. We use that as a learning opportunity. Let's not do that again. And we put whatever it is, mechanisms in place. We put legislation in place, perhaps, to ensure that doesn't happen again. And then this increases a culture of integrity. Why integrity? Well, again, one definition of integrity is to do the right thing even when no one else appears to be looking. Is it not? And so if we are doing the right thing and we continue to do the right thing, even if it's not obviously visible at that point in time, then not only is that a good habit to get into, but it can increase the chances of when people are not in the spotlight of them doing the right thing, because they might be able to get away with it, at least for a while. So nobody's looking. It doesn't really matter. Let's shout at those people about them taking free gifts, but let's us take those free gifts, because, we'll be in power with a big majority and nobody will bother anyway. Well, no, you're wrong. They did. They have. They do. And this is what the politicians need to understand. And this is what the new generation, not necessarily younger, but a new generation in terms of mindset and approach and ethics and morals, which I hope will come forward and step up to the plate. This is what they need to understand. They do understand it. We need those people in. Why don't we have them? Why is this so odd that I've got written there? That a leader, particularly a politician, would take responsibility and say, yeah, made a mistake. When's the last time you heard a politician say that? We made a mistake. We're sorry. We will learn from that. We will do better. And then they actually change things to make sure that it's unlikely that will happen again. What do we get instead? In Parliament, in the UK, the baying, the pantomime, the performance. What's the latest one? They're all saying, Labour, I won't take lectures from you. I mean, I shut up. It's puerile nonsense. I mean, I'm calling it performative. I'd call it a pantomime, but it's an insult to pantomimes. Seriously. You get these little phrases and everybody sees it for what it is. This is what you're not getting. People have absolutely woken up to this for all sorts of reasons. And they're looking at it and going, you're not fit for purpose. Those debates, so-called PMQs, parliamentary questions, none of it appears to be fully fit for purpose. There are some areas that I think, yeah, that's okay. But a lot of it really needs to be just rebuilt to serve the people. And so when we get the dodging of answering questions, I've talked about this before, I'm not the only person who talks about it, it is infuriating. Who does it serve? Does it look good? Does it solve anything? It's a nonsense. What are we doing? Why are you wasting your time doing that when you could be doing something constructive for the nation? Why are you wasting your time? Why are you travelling? What's your carbon footprint like? You go on about that. Well, what about all that hot air? What is it actually achieving? And yes, I appreciate there are some conversations, there are some debates which do achieve things, and that is a good thing, but let's have more of them and less of this performance art, because that's all that it is, and it is not good performance art. Even the worst thing that I've ever seen in the Tate, modern, this stuff is worse than that. You wouldn't get in the door. It's really awful, unless it was like some kind of dystopian horror show that this is how we ended up, like this, where they don't actually answer questions and they all use the same line, I won't take lectures from you. I mean, what is that? Anyway, why aren't we seeing it? So where have the good people gone? Where are the good leaders? I think they're around, but if we find them or we're aware, let's help support them, let's promote them, let's get them into these parties, because in many ways this needs to be done across the board. It's not just Labour, it's every politician, every political party. And the politicians who are in charge right now or thinking about being in charge of the country, take note. Take note, I'm not the only person saying this by any stretch of the imagination, but it is not acceptable anymore to spin yarns, to not answer questions, to point at the other individual and say, yeah, but what about what you did? Fine, we know what they did. Stop it. It's not useful. It is not conducive to building a country that needs to be improved at this point in time in terms of the economy and many other things. So let's then look here. Now, this, I appreciate, refers to the States, but some people from the States watch this channel, so hello. And I think it is it's just relevant to all politicians. It's also relevant to business because, as I've suggested, some businesses are corrupt in the sense that they're not moral and ethical. And this primacy of the shareholder, I also find problematic because the shareholders can be rapacious and without conscience. Then where's the safeguards to the population, to the consumer, that need to be built in? Yes, I appreciate there are some legally, but not enough. And I think we need to reverse that corruption. But once more, because of the sway that they hold, I'm focusing here, thinking about politicians. So this is a morning consult poll, 29, and it's the top things. This is not the full list that Americans hate most about politicians. So if you're an American, you can decide to agree or not agree. If you're in the UK, do these apply here as well? So, number one, a lack of political courage. The belief that politicians prioritise re-election over making the best decisions for the country. I mean, what do you think about that? Is that something that we've seen? Do we see politicians who just do what they think they need to do to get re-elected or indeed to get into power? Is that what we see? I would suggest it is. I would suggest that with Labour, we saw a lot of things being said to get into power, to be elected in the first place. And now, to hang on to power, all this U-turning that is going on is all about just trying to stay in as long as possible. In the first instance, for the Prime Minister to hold on to his job as long as he possibly can. And then secondary to that, I'm sure in his mind at least, is for the party to not have to face some kind of snap election or whatever it may be, to keep going until, well, have we got another 4 years, is it? Oh my gosh. And so that's what we're seeing at these turnarounds. Now, to be fair, and I always do attempt to be fair, there are politicians, they're members of the current government in the UK who understand all this, who are decent and get it, but it is difficult for them to make their voices heard. I totally understand that, which is why we've got to speak out to make sure that we do have these decent people who feel strong enough and brave enough to stand up and say what needs to be said. And I think that, again, that's throughout every party. This is not just Labour, although I have to focus on them here because they are causing some of the biggest issues in the UK, at least, but it is every politician. The game is rigged. We need to change this. And so wouldn't it be useful if we could have people who weren't talking about just re-election and actually doing what's right for the right reasons? And one of the issues for Keir Starmer is that he's boxed himself in, because not only did he hugely misjudge what was important to many people in the nation in terms of seemingly, in fact not seemingly, was generating punitive measures against the vulnerable. I won't go into the detail. I've talked about it before. If you're in the UK, you'll almost certainly know what I'm talking about. So, because that wasn't part of his value set, it would seem, and belief set, it would seem, that's bad enough. And then now to be spinning around and U-turning, and I'm glad to see the U-turns, but what does it make him? How is his level of integrity in your mind on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being low, 10 being high. Probably not 10, right? So just this sense of we will say anything to appease you in the moment, but we probably, as we've already demonstrated, won't keep some promises if we can get away with it going forward. That's where we're left. That's the state of play, in the UK at least, which I think is appalling. And we're just meant to go, yeah, this is fine. It absolutely isn't. And then here, corruption. Now, again, this is specifically talking about the States, this poll, perceived unethical or illegal behaviour, with many viewing politicians as self-serving or influenced by special interests. So corruption can mean many things, but I think if we focus here, self-serving and influenced by special interests, isn't it fair to say that so many of them seem to be self-serving, that so many of them, you just get the impression they're going through this rite of passage because it gives them, of course, huge visibility and connections, doesn't it? How many politicians who reach a certain level, a certain visibility, do you see, selling the big issue? Not many, right? If any at all. Why? Because the connections that they've made, the influence that they can then begin to have, is worth something. It's worth a lot, very often, to people in, let's say, business, lobbying groups, NGOs. So that rite of passage, being in that role, can be, well, it can mean that they never have to worry about things going forward. And you've got to wonder whether it's a case of some of them putting up with what can be a pretty tough job in terms of the flack and the pressure. And let's bear that in mind. They put up with it because they know that ultimately what's going to happen is they're off to, it's beer and honey from then on in for the rest of the days. So there is, in my opinion, this self-serving element to it. And then influenced by special interests, well, of course, this can mean that they push certain agendas because maybe it's their hobby horse, maybe it's something that they are interested in, but of course it could be that there is something that will benefit them in due course. It's not necessarily illegal. I know here it says unethical and illegal behaviour. Illegal, I don't think that happens as much as certainly unethical, but I'm pretty certain illegal doesn't happen as much, if at all, certainly in the UK. Close to it maybe, but definitely unethical, definitely self-serving, and definitely influenced by special interests. For me, the primary one is self-serving, because this is what it looks like. It's self-serving, whether it is a power trip, whether it is, right, okay, I am here and I can now make decisions that will go down in history, and they get a kick out of it. And I'm convinced as well that many of them see it as a springboard to just getting involved on the world stage in terms of the decision makers and the people who are having conversations in little groups, in little areas, in different parts of the world that can impact us as well. So the politicians, when they leave politics, but even before they leave, some of them like that idea. And as a counter to that, what I would suggest as well is that there very much are politicians who are decent. Again, they are ethical, they are moral, they get into politics to make those changes. But if the system itself is corrupted by trade-offs, and if you do this and I say that, then it doesn't go anywhere. It's self-stultifying, which means that corrupt rigidity will not allow the good people to get into those positions without them effectively being maneuvered or influenced either to do and say what is the let's say the narrative of the day, I'll put it that way around, or they're just nudged along and they never get into those positions. But so what do we need? Well, of course, we need enough people. They're there who understand that they are there to serve, who understand that the reason that they're in that role, in that job, in that position is to serve the country, not themselves. So it's the flip side of self-serving, which is why it's a good phrase, because it's not meant to be self-serving. It's meant to be serving the community at the bottom, supporting, serving the country, serving the constituency. And again, some people get it, but how do we find them? When we find them, how do we spot it? And when we spot it, how do we help nudge them into those positions so they get higher and higher and higher up the slippery slope towards being in positions of real power and influence, so that the people who are there have much more integrity. They are moral and they're ethical. And can you imagine then what a difference that would make? Just to go back to a couple of things that I've said. Hey, I made that mistake. I'm taking full responsibility. I'm being accountable for that. We'll not do that again. The reason it happened was this. Here's what we'll do differently. When we get into power, we promise to do this, 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 and this. Then they keep those promises. We are not hypocritical. We're not criticising people who are in power whilst doing exactly the same things ourselves. We understand that the temperature of the nation tends towards protecting the vulnerable, protecting the innocent, protecting the population as well from whatever harms may be coming our way, understanding that people have a voice that should be listened to. And so enough of this nonsense that we're hearing right now. I won't take lectures from you or the likes of you. Forget that. Take some lectures. You might learn something. Also, let's get rid of this whole language about your right-wing or right-wing extremism. That's fallen flat in its face. And if I were you, politicians, I'd stop using it, because I think when you get your head out of, well, whatever it may be, and look around and actually talk to some people who are not in your political bubble, you may well find that the majority of people actually think the same way. They've had enough. They want decency, they want honesty, they want people in those positions who understand they are there to serve the population. And before Keir jumps up and says, populism, populism, I come back to, not really, I think that's called democracy. And if people have genuine concerns about safety, about security, about helping the old, let's say, you should listen to that. That's not populism. To think that populism is wrong, also, I'll come on to it in a second. Because it's not populism in the sense that it's just agreeing with people for the sake of it. As I've explained before, if someone agrees apparently with what people are saying, but that's just to get into power, it's called being a demagogue. It's demagoguery. And that's Machiavellian. And I think that's what Keir's always been referring to when he says populism. I think. It's just weird. He doesn't seem to understand that. But anyway, to be fair, there are different definitions. Populism is listening and then delivering, saying, yeah, this, and this is an issue. But if people are really concerned about security, if they're concerned about borders, if they're concerned about the vulnerable in society, then to be called the far right or right wing or whatever the heck it is, or right wing extreme, I mean, this is just nonsense. It's utterly ludicrous, and it should be laughed at more than anything else. And then for our current Prime Minister, again I'm talking the UK here, to deride populism without understanding what it is. But I suspect, again, to be very fair, that what he's been trying to say is that's demagoguery. It's jumping on the bandwagon and saying, hey, I think the borders should be secure, or whatever it may be. That's just jumping on that bandwagon. No, it's a primary human need for the village to be secure. Keir, you should know that. And if you do know it, then stop being so disingenuous. But you should know it. And you should say you know it. So when he's saying populism, I think he means demagoguery, but it's meant to be an insult. So two mistakes. One, it isn't an insult. That's actually how democracy works. And two, the fact that you're essentially shouting down anyone who disagrees and has a different opinion, which, by the way, is most of the population, is hubris in the extreme. So ego-driven leadership is so passé. Anyway, that's what I think we need to consider, because we need to find those leaders who are in those positions of influence right now, however lowly, so to speak, in terms of the hierarchy that may be, and really support them, which means they need to tell us, they need to speak up, they need to just step up to the plate and say what they think and say what they believe in. And when we are voting for people or encouraging people to get into positions, then we need to make sure that we ask the right questions of them, because we've got to get the right person in the first place. We need to understand what they represent, and then we have to ensure at every stage of the process of helping people, voting for them, supporting them, referencing them, attending the speeches, whatever it may be, we have to ensure also that, and this applies to all of these politicians, that the panopticon is at play. You're not watching us, we're watching you. I know you like it to be that way around. You're doing your damnedest to make it that way around, some of you. We are watching you. You are accountable to us, and you may be voted into that position of power, but it is dependent on, it's by agreement, isn't it? Is by agreement. It is dependent on you doing what is considered by the consensus, again, democracy, what is ethical and what is moral, and understanding that if that doesn't happen, then later or sooner, you will lose that position. You will lose it, and you will be out of power and position for probably a long time, and you may never recover. But my messages about the panopticon thing, the idea in essence that I'm getting at, is that there's a probation period. I always say this should be in place for leaders, and the higher up, the more power a leader has, the longer the probation period. It's kind of quite the reverse very often at times, isn't it? Wow, they got in that position, we can't question them now. No, you're damn right we can. It's the opposite. And so when someone is in government, the leadership team, and of course that would include the Prime Minister, when they're there, then they need to be on probation constantly. That's what it's about. That's what you signed up for. So the idea of authoritarianism and some kind of dictatorship, if we're not careful, forget it. Ain't happening. Because people are too awake. They've woken up to this. And so the lenses are on you. We need to find out what you're thinking. We need to understand why you're making decisions. We need to hear you say, we made a mistake. We're sorry. What are you going to do differently next time? How are you going to learn from that? You actually want to stay in power for a bit longer? That's how you do it. Be moral, be ethical, own up. And I come back to, therefore, when people are attempting to get into those positions and we are helping them, we're voting, we're promoting, whatever it may be, still the probation period is there. And so someone like Farage in Reform, same thing. Damn right it's the same thing. Mustn't make the mistake that a lot of people made by being so desperate for change after the Tories. And again, if you're tuning in from America, I'm speaking here specifically about the UK in this instance. So people so jaded, desperate for change, and a lot of people being really wary of this guy, Starmer, but going, oh, well, what are we going to do? And some people not voting, and some people voting a different way entirely, but by nature of the trashing that the country took through the Tories being in power too long, not accountable enough, a lot of infighting, a lot of people giving up, shambles all round. Because of that, somebody gets in power that a lot of people were very, very, very wary of. I've had people write to me and say they dreaded it. They absolutely dreaded that guy getting in. And so it came to pass that he got into power. But enough's enough. Because it's almost like, here's a list of things, Labour and care not to do. And you did them all. I mean, how pea-brained are you lot? What on earth were you thinking? It's like, are you trying to do this deliberately? These are the things not to do. Now, again, I know there are people in the Labour Party who understand all this and who get it and who are frustrated. And what I'm trying to say is this. We're in a situation now where the old model, the old languages, or language models, small language model, not a large one. Maybe AI would do better. No, it wouldn't at all. In fact, I wonder sometimes who is running things. The old language of left and right, I don't think applies. I think what we're looking at is something that's more centred around morals and ethics and service. That's it. That's what we need to focus on. So, if it's Labour, you need to be there. If it's Reform, you need to be there. If it's the Tories, you need to be there. If it's Lib Dems, you need to be there. If it's the Greens, you need to be there. Whoever it is, it's there. That's how you get into a position of power, and you have a country which is behind you, more or less. Can't please all of the people all the time, right? Understand that, of course. That's how you get there, and that's maybe how you stay there for a bit. I hope that makes sense. That's my, I suppose, bit of a rant, but I believe it's important to say, as I've suggested already. I think it's important to speak up, and I think it's important to remind the people in Westminster that they are accountable. This is by consent. It's all by consent, and we, the people, demand that you tidy up your act, like big style and quickly. Anyway, let me just check. According to this, and sometimes the system doesn't seem to pick up messages, don't think anybody sent a message in. If you have been watching live, I hope you enjoyed this. If you watch live and on the recording, if it turns out okay, then I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do like this kind of stuff, then please comment, like, and share. That always helps as well. Anyway, for the moment, from me, bye for now.